VR should be the best place to make electronic music. So why do most VR instruments feel worse than using a laptop? The mistake, which I've made myself, is trying to create tools for experienced musicians rather than an instrument for the human body. As a creative developer, I've made a ton of different sound experiments. I've helped build DJ controller setups where you change music real time. Other things where you're like touching objects and they make sound. I also make electronic music using FL Studio, which is software you run on a computer. But I wondered, what if you could move this process of making music into virtual reality? Because anything is possible, right? Things can explode, gravity can be backwards, you have this whole 3D space to work with to be able to intuitively create sound. So I created a few different VR instruments, and through these experiences, I'm going to tell you about what did work, what didn't work, and the 3 principles you can use when making your own instruments in VR. When given an opportunity to bring an instrument to a festival where hundreds of people would try it out, I wanted to make sure that it would bring something that's unique to VR, but that anyone would be able to enjoy. This is challenging because VR is so new and a lot of people don't really know how it works. They've never tried it before. Walking up to a computer and using a mouse feels easy, but there's not really a set of VR controls that's established that people are used to. So it makes it especially important that you're building something that's simple and that anyone's able to use with minimal instructions. So I wondered, is this something that's even possible with virtual reality, or is this a medium that's just too new and too strange where it's going to be really difficult for people to learn how to use a VR instrument easily? I thought back on one of the first music apps that I made. This idea of bringing your DAW into virtual reality. What if you could make music just by touching things around you and feeling like you're making music like a magician? I set up recording and looping functionality using Unreal Engine with the new Metasounds functionality that had just been released. I brought in a couple simple instruments. So I brought in this percussion grid, which is a bunch of different funky shapes, which each have their own sounds. And then I also brought in a theremin, where you can add interesting tones to a composition by moving your hand around. I chose to make the instrument in mixed reality because then I figured it's more flexible to use in a lot of different situations. Like in a jam sesh with your friends, you could be like talking to them and seeing them, but also doing stuff in the headset. I built out the application over the course of maybe 2 months, and I used it to make some of my own music and to jam with friends a little bit. Although the app worked like I expected it to, it didn't feel right. I was thinking about timing instead of really listening. I had to carefully launch my hand at the right shape at the right time and make sure that I was hitting it on the beat so that as I was adding more layers to the loop, everything would sound good and it would be synced up. See how pointed my hand is here? I was paranoid about touching the wrong shape or landing on the shape at the wrong moment. And I felt a little isolated. So I could see musicians around me, but they couldn't see me. And I wish I could just go back to my computer and open my software I'm used to and program some beats really fast. With more practice, I could probably develop skills to be able to use this type of system more fluidly. I just didn't want to. I felt like I was managing software and not really like making music in a fun way. I realized the problem wasn't virtual reality as the type of instrument I was making. The mistake was trying to build tools for experts rather than an instrument for bodies. For this festival, I decided to bring an instrument that was much, much simpler. The instrument would be controlled only by using your hands, and no advanced timing would be necessary, or buttons, or loops, or anything confusing. I made sure every instrument was quantized in the application, or if it wasn't, it would be something you could play without strict quantization being necessary. So no more like ninja grabbing stuff on the beat. I also decided to stick with the mixed reality environment to blur physical reality with the VR application. And I think mixed reality is also just really nice for people who aren't familiar with VR because you tend to have a lot fewer issues with nausea or discomfort. In order to make the experience engaging, I would have 4 different instruments that come in and out of your world. You would discover how they work only by interacting with them using your hands. I started by drawing sketches of as many instruments as I could imagine. I did 2D drawings as well as 3D mock-ups in Gravity Sketch. I used these sketches to narrow down a smaller set of instruments to prototype in Unreal Engine. After testing about 10 different instrument styles, I settled on 4 that I thought were the strongest: a wave synthesizer, a theremin, a sequencer, and a keyboard. Like a violin, the instruments all have dynamic elements, so the way that you touch things with the amount of force or speed, it changes the way the instrument sounds. One challenge was figuring out the amount of space that the instrument should take up. So there's 3 different major space formats when you're thinking about a musical instrument. There's room space, where you're able to walk around a whole area to change sound. There's arm space, where you're reaching around to touch things. And then there's hand space, where the controls are focused on smaller finger movements. I chose to use arm space to keep things accessible and easy, so that I could have a seated experience where I wouldn't have to calibrate the broom too much in between different people. I've seen great DJ performances, but it can be really hard to see what's going on the DJ controller, or what button's doing what. Arm space lets the musician control sound with these big movements, so you can see more of the decisions that the musician's making during a performance. It also lets you map big gestures to big sounds. It took me a couple months of steady work to build out this instrument and make it feel right. I used all the time I could find in between client work and getting some rest. When the application was finished, I did testing with friends. One concern that came up was the amount of time you spend interacting with one instrument before the next one flies in. Some people felt like as soon as they were figuring out how things work, the instrument would leave, and then they would be on to the next thing. I decided to slow everything down a bit to make the experience more meditative, so it was a bit more slow going rather than a manic movement feel. But in retrospect, I found out that there's actually a huge range of preference for this type of thing, and I ended up getting a lot of feedback where people said they wanted to spend less time and see new stuff more quickly. So I think in the future it'd be great to consider how to make this something people can choose as they're playing. Like, maybe people can choose when the next instrument should come in. In the end, I created an experience I'm really proud of. I shared a version online so people can explore it on their own, but what really mattered was seeing people experience it in person. Over 300 people played GeoGroove at Bumbershoot Music and Arts Festival in Seattle. A huge range of ages also tried it out, a lot of younger kids as well as older adults. It was many people's first time using VR. It was a great experience for people who had never used VR and wanted an introduction to it, and almost everyone left with a smile on their face. Kids especially were ecstatic, flailing their arms around and testing the limits of the physics and the sound. By using a streaming setup where the audience could see what the people using the instrument could see, and then the people using the instrument could also see the audience and the world behind them, created this cool kind of communication where people would be telling their friends what things are doing and asking questions to each other and having this communication with the ability to see each other's worlds. It also let passerbys see the experience without having to put on the headset themselves. If you're interested in making some musical instruments in virtual reality, here's 3 principles that I would keep in mind. The first one is that the instrument should be possible for someone with no musical or technical background to be able to immediately play with. It's even better if it doesn't sound bad, ever. It was really helpful in GeoGroove that you don't need to press buttons in order to operate it. You just move your hands around. The looper was cool, but it was really hard to learn how to use it initially. As any musician knows, creating music through a looper is kind of a skill unto itself. With GeoGroove, I chose to keep things simpler, with any looping happening more automatically through my sequencer. The second principle is movement as narrative. So I think that XR instruments give us a potential to create really cool electronic music performance. Imagine seeing a DJ who's mixing and performing live, but they're generating their music through movement at a concert. By mapping the force and position of your hands, you can explore different sounds by changing the way you move your hands. Moving forward, I'd like to explore XR instruments that allow for even more expressivity. Third principle is dynamic mappings. By mapping things like force to pitch or loudness, this gives potential for someone to become connected to the instrument in a way that feels really intuitive. It also lets you create interesting dynamic tones. You're able to adjust your form to see how different angles or speeds change the way the music sounds. The original looper was essentially a set of buttons that you use to trigger things on or off. On the other hand, these little triangle trees in GeoGroove are doing real-time sound synthesis. So you have infinite possibilities of the type of sound that can come out. It's all based on a sine wave, and you might get pleasant low tones, or you can see someone punching the trees and getting loud, chaotic sounds. This type of dynamic mapping goes a long way to creating a fun instrument. Moving forward, I'd like to keep creating musical instruments in virtual reality. I'd like to deepen the controls and sounds that are possible to be created while keeping the instrument intuitive. I'm continuing to learn more about instrument design theory and what makes instruments so useful and appealing to musicians. As we move into a more digitally activated world, what should be avoided and what kind of beauty can we create? I'm excited to see the expansion of XR instruments happen. I'd love to hear about any ideas or experiences that you have on the topic.